Chapter 84. The two-headed man spat out a mouthful of blood. The cold-faced man got up from the ground in a sorry state. He glared fiercely at the other head. "Shut up if you don't want to die." The effeminate man was dumbfounded. What did he do wrong? Why did Mo Wushang hit him for no reason? There was a burning pain on his back. His tender skin smashed against the stone wall. With such a loud sound, his wound was cut open by the stone wall. The stinging pain was overwhelming. Shen Yueji's small face was filled with confusion. "They did so many things before, but I didn't see you touch them at all. Why did you suddenly hurt them today?" These two-headed monsters did not even have the strength to resist when facing Mo Wushang. Mo Wushang's handsome face was covered with haze. His cold eyes were filled with cold light. His aura was cold and arrogant, as cold as ice. He did not speak. "This is noble Consort Shen." Ji Chu carefully glanced at his master's expression and lowered his voice. "She is cooperating with my master." A sharp light fell on his back, as if countless knives were scraping his flesh. He quickly changed his words. "At the same time, she is also the person my master admires." "Admires? Noble Consort Shen?" The cold-faced man's face was pale, and there was still a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. He looked at Shen Yueji with a mocking gaze. The daughter of the Shen family, the eldest daughter of General Shen He, the beloved pearl of the Shen family. I thought the regent was infatuated with the late empress. I didn't expect that he would fall in love with someone else so quickly. There was a hint of mockery in his tone. Mo Wushang's face was cold. He did not put his words in his eyes at all. Shen Yueji pulled over a round chair and sat beside the man. "Tonight's goal isn't to capture you. I just want to know which palace's concubine is the master behind all of you. What is the purpose of killing those palace maids in the name of Jiayang Palace?" Shuang Shi's palm slapped the long whip. He walked in front of the effeminate man. He lifted his chin and looked at it. "What's in your eyes?" The effeminate man grinned. "If I didn't see your master, I might still be interested in you. Now, I'm only interested in your master's blood." Bang! Another heavy sound rang out. This time, he spat out 2 mouthfuls of blood. The cold-faced man's handsome face was ferocious and furious. "Shut up." The feminine-looking man was speechless. What did he do? The cold-faced man's eyes were filled with malice. "Since Shen Guifei has the ability to make the regent fall in love with you, with your intelligence, why don't you go and find out who we are?" Hearing this, Shen Yueji smiled slightly. "Like the regent, I also don't want to disturb the former empress's meditation. If I go to investigate, I only need to hand you over to the emperor. Why do I need to go through so much trouble to cooperate with the regent?" Meeting the man's cold and arrogant gaze, Shen Yueji twisted her lips. "If it is beneficial to the former empress, I will allow you to continue doing whatever you want in the palace. If it is not beneficial to the former empress and you use the name of the former empress to do all kinds of bad things, how can Ben Gong continue to allow you to continue doing evil?" The cold-faced man sneered. What a joke. In this world, there are still people who think about the late empress. Chapter 85. Hearing his decisive tone, Shen Yueji had no choice but to turn to look at the effeminate man. The effeminate man did not change. He was depressed that he was almost beaten to death by Mo Wushang twice. Now that Shen Yueji's gaze fell on him again, he revealed a charming smile that he thought was incomparably romantic. "Whatever you want to know, just ask me. As long as you let me drink a few mouthfuls of your blood, I will tell you the master behind me and the reason why we are doing this." This time, it was not Mo Wushang who did it. Double Happiness's whip landed on his handsome face. A large gash appeared on his handsome face in an instant. The effeminate man instantly covered his face and cried out, "Ah, you lowly little palace maid, how dare you disfigure my face?" Double Happiness looked at him coldly. "Who do you think you are? How dare you have designs on my master? Speak. If you don't speak, I will also disfigure the right side of your face." The effeminate man howled and covered his disfigured face angrily. "If you have the ability, then disfigure the right side of my face. Anyway, that is not my face." Seeing this, Double Happiness raised her whip and was about to hit the right side of his face. Double Happiness. Shin Yueji calmly called out to stop her. Master. Double Happiness reluctantly withdrew her whip. This two-headed monster almost killed this servant just now. Go get a knife. These simple words made the effeminate man happy. Shin Yueji smiled slightly. It's just a few drops of blood. If my few drops of blood can be exchanged for a few words of truth from you, it's not a loss for me. Without waiting for her next move, Shin Yueji felt a chill on the back of her hand. She looked down and found that, unknowingly, the man's big hand was on the back of her hand. His handsome and cold face was as steady as Mount Tai, as if he was not holding her hand. Throw them into the cage. Yes, master. Mo Wushang. What do you want to do? I'm warning you, you better not act recklessly. Otherwise, you won't get any benefits. The two-headed man wanted to struggle, but because Shin Yueji had drugged them, Ji Chu effortlessly subdued them. The two-headed man's entire body was tied up, unable to move. Only the two heads could still move and struggle. Mo Wushang, what exactly do you want? The cold-faced man's aura was cold and threatening, but it was far inferior to Mo Wushang's. His cold aura was quickly suppressed by Mo Wushang. Ji Chu picked them up with one hand. Both of you have drunk the blood of many palace maids in the past few days. Now, since both of you do not intend to reveal the mastermind behind this, my master will let you have a taste of what it feels like to have your blood drunk. It just so happens that the corpses of those palace maids are still alive. He dragged the two of them inside, and the cage inside made loud noises. Creak, creak. Blood dripped from the two-headed man's back onto the ground. As he was being carried away, the smell of blood had already reached the noses of the palace maids. Sitting and waiting for death. When the palace maids, who only had half their bodies left, saw the two-headed monster, their eyes glowed with excitement. Their hands clawed at the cage, as if they could tear the cage apart. Blood dripped from the corners of their mouths. It was black and viscous, emitting a foul and pungent smell of rotting corpses. Seeing this, the effeminate man's handsome face immediately changed. Chapter 86. Mo Wushang, you pervert, you actually left these corpses here and watched them rot. The palace maids in the cage had been dead for a long time. Only the upper half of their corpses remained, while the lower half of their legs had turned into a puddle of black water. In that thick black water, many black worms could be seen wriggling weakly. They had reached the end of their lifespans and had no strength left. Shuang she quickly walked to Ji Chu and heavily lashed the feminine man with the whip in his hand. There was a "pa" sound. The feminine man groaned and glared at Shuang Shi with gritted teeth. Aren't you very capable? After sucking the blood of so many palace maids in the palace, I'll let you have a taste of what it means to bring about your own destruction. The feminine man was really afraid this time. He thought that Mo Wushang had captured the two brothers simply to interrogate them. After all, what they had done was beneficial to the late empress. There was no need for him to go through so much trouble to get rid of them, but now, he was sitting elegantly with a beauty by his side. His cold and gloomy eyes were extremely gentle, and he had a gentleness that was easy to get along with. The cold man's voice was calm. Are you serious? Mo Wushang looked back coldly. Do you think I'm joking with you? You have to know that everything we do is for the sake of the late empress. If you kill us, it's tantamount to harming the late empress. That's right. The feminine man also nodded. We are indeed doing it for the late empress. Prince Regent, you are infatuated with the former empress. What we are doing now is to remind the world of the former empress again, and also to clear the former empress grievances. You know this in your heart. Otherwise, you wouldn't let us do whatever we want in the palace. Regent knows. Shin Yueji was surprised to hear this and looked at him subconsciously. Mo Wushang's handsome face flashed a touch of killing intent. Feeling the woman's gaze on him, his handsome face tightened and he said coldly, I don't know. I just feel that you don't know either. Shin Yueji muttered to herself. The man heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. The cold man's dark eyes flashed with light. Mo Wushang, are you sure you don't know? Throw them in. The man didn't give him a chance to speak. His cold words interrupted the cold-faced man's words. The cold-faced man's face was like frost. Mo Wushang. Wait. Seeing that the cage was about to open and that they were about to be thrown in, the effeminate man suddenly tightened his grip on the whip in Double Happiness's hand. The cold-faced man growled, "Let go." "No. Big brother, if we are really thrown in, we will die." Not only did the effeminate man's hand grab the whip in Double Happiness's hand, but even the cold-faced man's right hand grabbed the whip tightly under his control. She struggled a few times. "Damn it, why are you grabbing my whip? Let go of me." Are they that afraid of being sucked dry by those palace maids? In the face of the little woman's approach, Mo Wushang enjoyed it. His big hand slowly moved behind her and placed on the tea table. Hugging her in an ambiguous position, he wrapped his arms around her. Shen Yueji was so focused on the two-headed monster that she didn't notice his actions. They are half the masters of the black mites. If their blood is sucked dry, they will suffer 100 times more than others. I see. Chapter 87. When he heard that Mo Wushang had thrown them into the cages for the palace maids to enjoy, a crack appeared on his cold and calm handsome face. Shen Yueji's face showed a look of understanding. She moved her hand, only to find that the back of her hand was still pressed by a big white hand. Unknowingly, her hand had been held by the man for so long. She pulled her hand out of the man's palm, only to realize the ambiguous atmosphere between her and the man. "Prince Regent, aren't you standing a little too close to me? I'm almost out of breath. This is Jiayang Palace. It would be bad if the former empress saw this." Shen Yueji smiled slightly and got out of the man's arms. However, when her head came out, the back of her collar was pulled back by the man. She sat firmly in the original position. Her body was stiff and she couldn't move. She felt that the man was in the same position as before, half circling her in his arms. From beginning to end, he didn't say a word. She has already seen it. Mo Wushang pressed against her earlobe, and the cool air was like a circle of winter glass on her ear. It was so cold that even her ears could be frozen. Shen Yueji's body couldn't help but feel numb. She was even more certain that Mo Wushang couldn't be trusted or wanted. She had changed her mind so quickly to her predecessor. He was no different from those men who were fickle and had a group of wives and concubines. She found a gap and slipped out of the man's arms again. This time, she was prepared. Her whole body was like a loach, not giving the man a chance to catch her at all. She quickly walked in front of the two-headed monster and looked up and down. Finally, her eyes fell on the face of the feminine man. "I also think that the regent's proposal is very good. Since the two of you don't accept the soft approach, we can only use the hard approach. After all, these palace maids in the harem are some fresh human lives. They haven't made any big mistakes in daily life. It's really a pity that they died like this. As half a master of this harem, I should also seek some justice for them. What do you think, Regent?" She did not know when the man had appeared behind her. This time, he was still polite and not too close to her. With his hands behind his back, his black eyes were cold and outstanding. Exactly. Hearing this, the two-headed monster's face completely changed. His face was lifeless as if he had seen a ghost. His face was cold and his eyes were filled with mockery. The two couldn't help but clench their fists. There was no chance of victory if they risked their lives. Right now, they could not even use a third of their martial arts. Even their lightness kung fu was not as fast as a human running on foot. Neither of them expected that Mo Wushang would actually attack them. They had complete confidence that even if they were discovered in the palace, they wouldn't be afraid because Mo Wushang would save them. Perhaps it was because they were too confident that they never thought that they would fall into Mo Wushang's hands before that day even arrived. "We have an agreement between us. If I tell you, I will be betraying my master." The cold-faced man's gaze swept across the two's faces and said coldly, "He's already dead, what's the point of betrayal? In this world, there was no one who didn't do it for themselves. When faced with a choice between life and death, any intelligent person would know how important their life is." Chapter 88. Our benefit is to suck the blood of these palace maids. Anything else is of no benefit to us. Oh. Shen Yueji raised her eyebrows. So, what you said just now was the truth. Are you really doing this for the former empress? The effeminate man gritted his teeth. Of course. He glared fiercely at Mo Wushang. The regent knows about this. Otherwise, do you think he would allow us to do evil in the imperial harem and act so arrogantly in the name of the former empress for so long? Shen Yueji looked suspicious and looked at the man beside her again. Do you know or not? The man's body straightened and his handsome face was cold. I don't know. Since when did the high and mighty regent of Feng Nation, who holds great power in the court, become good at lying? Throw them in. Hey. Wait. Regent, let's talk. Don't lower yourself to my brother's level. If you say you don't know, then you don't know. Ask whatever you want to ask. Imperial concubine Shen is right. At this critical moment, saving our lives is the most important thing. However, we also need the assurance of Imperial concubine Shen and the regent. When we explain the whole story, you must let us go. Moreover, you are not allowed to interfere with what we do in the Imperial harem in the future. That won't do. First, we have to see what you are talking about. If it is beneficial to the former empress but not to me, how can I let you continue to be arrogant? Isn't that right, regent? Yes. The effeminate man sneered. As long as Imperial concubine Shen does not interfere too much in this matter, we can assure you that it is not only harmless but also beneficial to you. Beneficial to me? The effeminate man's eyes sharpened. Of course. The former empress is the eldest daughter of the Jiyu family. If there is a big movement in Jiayang Palace, everyone will point their fingers at one person. Imperial concubine Shen has just entered the palace and does not know about this matter. She will not be implicated. Once, hiss. The man gasped and glanced at the cold-faced man beside him. Big brother, what are you doing? Shen Yueji narrowed her eyes. The master behind you has his eyes on the empress. The two were shocked. It seemed that they did not expect her to guess Jiyu Yuyin so quickly. Seeing their reactions, Shen Yueji knew that her guess was correct. All right, you don't have to say anything else. This consort only needs to determine one thing. In this harem, who exactly do you serve? It doesn't matter if you don't want to say it. I will find out sooner or later, but it will be a little troublesome. Of course, it won't do you any good. It's Ru Fei. The feminine-looking man gritted his teeth and blurted out. Ru Fei. Shen Yueji took a step forward, her expression strange. Lu Qingru? Her performance surprised the three of them. Especially double happiness. Her ladyship's reaction. Why did it seem like she had known Lu Qingru for many years? In her impression, the empress did not know this person. Only Mo Wushang's pitch-black eyes moved up and down. It was too calm. The cold-faced man raised his eyebrows. You know Ru Fei? Shen Yueji restrained the strange look in her eyes. After a moment, she shook her head. I don't know him. I'm just surprised how a concubine in the harem could control the two of you. I heard from the regent that you are from the western region. Chapter 89. Shen Yueji didn't care about Feng Jiuqing's empire. Now hearing the cold-faced man's words, she smiled. I'm being rude. Since I already know what I want to know, you can go. The two didn't move. It seemed that her words didn't represent Mo Wushang. Until the man lost his patience. His cold voice was like the snow falling from the sky. What are you waiting for? The two-headed monster was speechless. Big brother, why do I feel strange? Why did the regent change his mind today? After leaving the Jiayang Palace, the two didn't dare to stay here any longer. They went all the way back to the hiding place. The cold-faced man sneered. The regent has a change of heart for the former empress. Can't you see it? The feminine man looked surprised. Impossible. The regent likes the late empress so much. You and I have seen it with our own eyes. Then, he was silent. He seemed to think of Shen Yueji. No woman dared to get close to the regent when the former empress was alive or after her death. Shen Yueji is the first. Could it be that the regent? If that's the case, concubine Ru, thank you, regent, for tonight. In the secret room. The two stood side by side, looking at the body of the palace maid that gradually turned into a pool of black water in the cage. Shen Yueji suddenly said, "The emperor will come to my Phoenix Palace tonight. I need to go back early. When I have time in the future, I will thank the regent properly. He will go to your place tonight?" The man's black eyes narrowed. A familiar haze climbed up his handsome cheeks. The atmosphere was gloomy. Shen Yueji moved her lips. "Today, the empress plotted against me and I counterattacked. The emperor felt sorry for me, so it's reasonable for him to come to my Phoenix Palace to comfort me. There's nothing strange about it." After saying that, she turned her back and didn't notice his strangeness. She said, "I still have some other things to do. I need to think about them after returning to the palace. Regent, I'll take my leave first." "Double happiness." "Yes, Your Highness." "Master, are you serious?" Shen Yueji and the others left the secret room. Ji Chu looked at his master who was still looking in the direction they left. Deep in thought, Zhongxian couldn't help but ask. The man's face was cold and incomparably handsome. When he heard this, he glanced at him. "You don't think I'm serious?" Then the late emperor, realizing what he had said, Ji Chu quickly shut his mouth. Because of the late empress, Master had been depressed for so long. He had seen it with his own eyes. Now that Master had become better, he was naturally more happy than anyone else. It was just that he felt a little strange. Compared to the daughter of the Shen family in the past, the current Miss Shen is indeed more likable. He chuckled and couldn't help but say, Ru Fei, when the late empress was alive, had the best relationship with the late empress. On the day the late empress was executed, Ru Fei knelt in front of the emperor's hall and begged for mercy for the late empress. At this point, a trace of doubt flashed across his face. After being refused an audience with His Majesty, she hid a hidden weapon and went to Auspicious Harmony Palace to kill Jiyu Yuyin. In order to protect her, the people of the Lu family have already been beheaded by His Majesty. The current concubine Ru can be said to have no one behind her, much less a backer. How did she become the master of this two-headed monster? Chapter 90. Because the current Lu Qingru had long been banished to the cold palace by the emperor. It was extremely difficult for her to survive on her own, so how could she have the ability to take in the two-headed monster of the western region? Regarding Jiyu Yuqin, Mo Wushang and Lu Qingru had met a few times. Seeing his cold and sharp eyes, his thin lips pursed slightly, revealing the master's displeasure, she said that Feng Zhouqing will stay in her Phoenix Perch Palace tonight. Ji Chu. Master's focus seemed to be a little off. Master still plans to stay in Jiayang Palace tonight, don't you plan to return to the mansion? Mo Wushang looked at him indifferently. Ji Chu hurriedly bowed, I understand, I'll do it now. I won't go back either. It was night. There were no stars in the night sky, and gusts of cold wind made people feel as if they were deep in an icy snow cellar. Shen Yueji looked up, and the moonlight had disappeared. This was the true meaning of the saying, she couldn't see her own fingers in front of her. She couldn't even see her own hands now. The lights in the palace in front of her had already been extinguished. Occasionally, when she passed by the bedroom of a certain concubine, there was still a weak light shining out, so she could see a little bit of the road. There were also very few palace maids and eunuchs on the road. Every inch of darkness before her eyes was telling her that it was already very late. She stopped and waited for Shuangxi for a while. Shuangxi quickly caught up with her, panting, Concubine, tonight's night is really too dark. It has never been so dark before. It's gloomy and gloomy. Was Concubine Ru of Huayang Palace banished to the cold palace after the death of the former empress? Hearing her suddenly mention Concubine Ru, Shuangxi hesitated. This servant is not very clear about this. At that time, the matter of the former empress being drowned in the lake caused an uproar, so who had the time to care about Concubine Ru? However, there were still some rumors from the palace. It was said that on the day the former empress was ordered to be drowned in the lake, Concubine Ru knelt in the emperor's bedroom for a day, but the emperor refused to see her. Later, the former empress was completely drowned in the lake. Concubine Ru went back. But Shuangxi thought about it seriously. I heard that after Concubine Ru went back, she went back to her bedroom first and then went to see the empress. Then, that night, the Lu family was ordered by the emperor to confiscate their property. More than 100 lives were taken, and they were all executed at noon on the charge of rebellion. From that day onwards, concubine Ru was imprisoned in Huayang Palace forever. At this point, Shuangxi carefully looked around before moving close to Shen Yueji's ear and whispering, "The Lu family is considered a founding hero, and they are loyal to the Feng country. It is impossible for them to suddenly rebel without any secret plans. This matter has been suppressed by the emperor, and no one is allowed to mention it again. However, the eldest young master and the general should know a thing or two. Because it was a matter of the Lu family, your highness didn't care about it at the time, so this servant didn't pay much attention. Your ladyship, why are you suddenly concerned about concubine Ru?" Shen Yueji shook her head. "I find it strange. Since the Lu family's property has been confiscated, and Lu Qingru isn't from a family of generals, how did a rich young lady who stays at home control this two-headed monster and get involved with the western region? This servant doesn't know, but since it's concubine Ru, this servant can be sure of one thing." "What?" Chapter 91. Unfortunately, the former empress died less than 3 days after entering the palace, and concubine Ru was also imprisoned by the emperor on that day. Shen Yueji circled her hands under her long sleeves, and the emotions on her face made Shuangxi confused for a moment. After a long time, she raised her lips with a faint smile. "Yes, the relationship between concubine Ru and the former empress is indeed better than that of biological sisters." When they returned to Phoenix Perch Palace, before the two of them could enter, Jiao Dezhong came out of the hall with a worried face. Jiao Dezhong walked out of the hall with a worried look on his face. When he saw them, his face was filled with a myriad of emotions. It was hard to tell whether it was joy or fear. "Imperial concubine, you're finally back. Where did you go in the middle of the night? The emperor has been here for so long, but he didn't see you." "I was enjoying the scenery outside with Shuangxi. I don't know why, the scenery was so good that I forgot it was so late." "Imperial concubine, what do you think the emperor is?" Jiao Dezhong pulled her carefully. "How can the emperor believe what you said? It's so late at night, and the wind is cold and dew is heavy. Where did you go to enjoy the scenery? The emperor knew you went to Jiayang Palace a long time ago." "So what?" Shen Yueji teased him. "I was originally admiring the scenery, but I suddenly and inexplicably ended up at Jiaoyang Palace. Ben Gong cannot be blamed for this. The one to blame is that Ben Gong's sleeping quarters are too close to Jiaoyang Palace. If I had walked a little further, I would have reached the former empress's palace." She pushed Jiao Dezhong away and stepped into the hall. Before entering the hall, she looked back at Jiao Dezhong and asked tentatively, "The emperor isn't angry?" Jiao Dezhong sweated. "He's not angry, but..." "That's good." Jiao Dezhong was speechless. "At least wait for me to finish." Although the emperor wasn't angry, but his expression didn't seem too good. The man was slender and straight, with his back facing her. His hair was like a waterfall, flowing down the back of his head. He was dressed in white, elegant like an immortal. Compared to him without the dragon robe, he was less majestic, but more like an immortal. She slowly walked behind him and bowed. "Emperor, I heard from Jiao Gonggong that you've been here for a while." Hearing this, Feng Joqing turned around. His handsome face was as gentle as the wind, and his pitch-black and gentle eyes fell on her for an instant. Then, he stretched out his hand and exempted her from the formalities. "We don't care where you go during the day, but if you find Phoenix Perch Palace boring at night, bring more people with you. If the formation is too big, this concubine will not be able to breathe. I won't be able to adapt to anything." Shen Yueji smiled. "It's more interesting to walk with double happiness. Along the way, we can enjoy a lot of beautiful scenery in the palace." The man couldn't help smiling and looked her up and down. "Guifei doesn't look like the kind of person who would dislike a battle." Shen Yueji's little face darkened. "That's because I just entered the palace. Shouldn't I show off first?" Who knew that the complicated jewelry and the array would be too heavy, so I decided to simplify everything. The man didn't say anything else. He held her hand and walked towards the inner hall. "Change your clothes first. We have already ordered the imperial kitchen to prepare dinner." "Change clothes?" Shin Yueji was stunned. Seeing the man staying in the inner hall, he didn't look like he was going to leave. She circled the man's palm with her little hand. Your Majesty, why do you want me to change clothes? Feng Zhouqing's pitch-black eyes flashed, and he smiled gently. Guifei has been outside for so long, you should change your clothes. Hearing this, Shin Yueji couldn't help but mumble, then why don't you let me take a bath? Chapter 92. The man looked straight at her complaining face and chuckled. The dinner has been reheated twice. Does Imperial Concubine want me to let them reheat it 3 more times? Your Majesty, can you turn your back to me when I change my clothes? Hearing this, Feng Zhouqing couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Why? There were thousands of reasons in Shin Yueji's mind. All of them were, men and women should not touch each other, men and women should be different, men and women should be alone. But when it came to the point of saying it, the man in front of her was the emperor, and she was his imperial concubine in name, his woman. If she said these words out, Feng Zhouqing might really be angry. It was okay to use Jiu Yuyin to block it once. But if she blocked it too many times, she would be playing hard to get in the man's eyes. Shin Yueji grinned at the man. I'm shy. As she spoke, she really made a shy expression in front of the man. It could be seen that the man's handsome eyebrows moved. His beautiful eyebrows were raised, and a pair of deep black eyes fell on her little face that was pretending to be shy. He laughed. I just asked Imperial Concubine to take off your coat. Shin Yueji, seeing that she stood in the same place for a long time, her little face seemed to be fixed by someone. The stiff smile was still stuck on her little face. Feng Zhouqing stepped forward and picked up a coat from the soft bed that she took off when she went out today. His big hand fell on her shoulder, easily took off her outer skirt, and put a pink outer skirt on her body. The whole movement was smooth and elegant. There was only one sentence in Shin Yueji's mind now. Has it begun? No, it's over. The man was very close to her. His white and handsome face was like a young man coming out of a painting, clean and clear, and his white clothes were like snow. Incomparably handsome. After putting on the coat for her, the man's big hand didn't leave directly, but fell on her thin shoulder, and slightly tightened. Shin Yueji suddenly looked up. He was still as gentle as water. In addition to the gentleness in his dark eyes, there seemed to be another complex and dangerous emotion. Your Majesty, the Imperial Consort's own scent smells better. Feng Zhouqing's eyes drooped, and his elegant crimson lips curled up into a smile. If I carry an unfamiliar aura, I will feel uncomfortable. Shin Yueji's delicate little face was slightly pale. She chuckled and said, I also think that next time I meet the regent, I will walk around him and not argue with him again. The man held her hand and walked out of the inner hall. The Prince Regent is indifferent and unreasonable. You won't be able to gain anything from arguing with him. Jiaoyang Palace, it's best if you don't go there in the future. Shin Yueji wanted to pull her hand back, but the man held it tightly. With every word, the man's grip tightened, especially when he mentioned Mo Wushang and Jiaoyang Palace. I was bored in the palace today, so I randomly walked around. I don't know how I ended up in Jiaoyang Palace. Don't worry, Your Majesty, Jiaoyang Palace is filled with yin qi. If it weren't for double happiness following behind me to give me courage, I would have been scared to death. In the future, I will definitely not go to Jiaoyang Palace. Sitting on the round chair, the young emperor personally picked a dish for her. Shin Yueji stuffed this dish into her mouth, but it was tasteless. She had never underestimated Feng Zhouqing's intelligence and meticulousness. Chapter 93. When he said that there was a strange smell on her body, she knew that he must have noticed that she was with Mo Wushang tonight. He seemed to be calm and casual. Even though he had been smiling since she came back, such a man was dangerous. He was more dangerous than an enemy who wanted to get rid of you and kill you. Is the food not to your taste? Zhen specially asked General Shun about these meals and made them according to Guifei's preferences. Shin Yueji put down the bowl and chopsticks. As she moved, the man's eyes also looked at her. There is a smell of powder on Your Majesty's body. Her words made Feng Zhouqing stunned, and then he thought of something. He raised his lips and said, Is Imperial Concubine using my words to stop me? This concubine has seen Big Sister Empress a few times. This concubine can still distinguish the scent of Big Sister Empress's perfume. In addition to the smell of powder on Empress Sister, I also smell a strange smell on your Majesty's body. The man took a sip of tea and waited for her to continue. Shun Yueji glared at him. The emperor has been busy these days. How could he have the time to go to the concubine's palace? His days are even worse than a monk's. The sudden fragrance must have come from a little sister trying to attract the emperor's attention when the emperor was in the imperial garden and purposely bumped into you. Feng Zhouqing put down the teacup and raised his eyebrows slightly. Although I'm different from His Majesty, the people I meet are all the same. I didn't expect to meet the regent. I'm arrogant and can't stand being bullied at home, especially by Mo Wushang, who has always been disrespectful to me. In a moment of anger, I wanted to go up and ridicule him. It's reasonable. Your Majesty, you can't wrong me. Heaven and earth can prove my love for you. If I really have such feelings for the regent, I won't come to the palace. Shun Yueji's eyes turned red and there was a posture of tears. Feng Zhouqing glanced at her and said, Imperial concubine, you just need to explain. Since you can't squeeze out these tears, there is no need to force it. Your Majesty, if you don't give this concubine any face, it will make this concubine feel ashamed. The emperor lowered his head and smiled. He picked up a dish and put it in her bowl. Eat quickly. Otherwise, the food will be cold again. How's Big Sis Empress' face? The man's eyes dimmed slightly. General Shun had already sent the Yulu ointment into the palace. Now he should have applied the Yulu ointment and rest. Hearing this, Shun Yueji was slightly surprised. Your Majesty, you didn't go to Xionghe Palace today? Feng Zhouqing gracefully ate a mouthful of rice, his voice gentle. I am busy with the affairs of the imperial court, so I came to Imperial Consort's place after finishing my official duties. She paused for a moment and heard the man's last words. Who would have thought that the Imperial Consort would not be in her chambers, making us wait here for a long time? Shun Yueji laughed. I forgot the time while enjoying the beautiful scenery. Feng Zhouqing glanced at her with a smile. Not only does Imperial Consort look down on me, but it seems like Imperial Consort is also ignoring what I said to Imperial Consort. This concubine felt wronged, so I went out to relax and calm down. When I came back, I was still smiling cheekily at Your Majesty. Your Majesty, this concubine thinks that I have done enough. You know this concubine's character, to be able to tolerate to this extent for Your Majesty. Shun Yueji's voice was stuck. Chapter 94. She felt the warmth from the man's palm. Shun Yueji raised her head to look at him. There were really tears in her crystal eyes. Feng Zhouqing patted her little hand and comforted her gently. Jin knows that Guifei has been wronged because of today's matter. If it wasn't for the fact that I was prepared, that Xiao Zhuozi and Shuangxi had a private friendship, and I didn't know what happened, I would be charged with the crime of murdering the Empress because of jealousy. Is Your Majesty going to execute me to avenge the Empress? Feng Zhouqing was stunned to hear her angry and sorrowful tone. After a long time, he reached out his gentle hand to her gloomy little face. His big palm gently stroked her smooth little face. There is no need to execute me, but I am afraid that Guifei will have to suffer the flogging. Shun Yueji was instantly annoyed when she heard this. She didn't know where her courage came from, but she slapped his hand away. Pa! The sound scared Gao Dezhong, who was waiting at the side. He knelt on the ground with a plop. Your Majesty, her beautiful little face was full of displeasure. I have told Your Majesty before that as the daughter of the Shen family, what I despise the most is to use those despicable means to murder concubines and deceive Your Majesty. Feng Zhouqing was not angry at all, looking at her angry little face. The more angry she was, the softer the expression on his face was. He looked at her gently. Je naturally believe you. His words were as gentle as the wind. Shun Yueji wanted to find fault with him, but the words stuck in her throat. Feng Zhouqing stood up and put his big hands behind his back. Take away these dishes. Yes, Your Majesty. Gao Dezhong wiped the sweat on his forehead. He got up from the ground and quickly ordered people to come in and take away all the untouched dishes on the table. Before leaving, He didn't forget to look at Shen Yueji with a worried face. The meaning was self-evident. Even if this concubine is willing to believe in your majesty's words, and your majesty believes in this concubine, but today, your majesty's anger towards this concubine is also real. Your majesty loves the people as if they were his own children, and has always been warm and approachable to others. His majesty's appearance today truly frightened this concubine. When this concubine entered the hall, this concubine didn't even dare to salute and only wanted to tell the cause and effect of the matter first to prove this concubine's innocence. This concubine was afraid that if I spoke too late, then his majesty wouldn't give this concubine a chance to speak, blindly condemning this concubine's crime. Your majesty, Shen Yueji clenched her fists and walked behind him. Being framed for no reason and not giving people a chance to explain themselves, this feeling is really not good. The large hand under the long robe couldn't help but tremble slightly when it heard her words. At that moment, he forgot how to stretch his slender fingers. The man's handsome face turned pale, and his dark eyes seemed to be covered by something. When had there ever been such a person, with a pale, helpless face covered in tears, loudly questioned him? "You don't believe me, you don't believe me, you said that you would always believe me." Feng Jiuqing closed his eyes gently, and his trembling fingertips slowly returned to normal. There was a burst of pain in his heart. This kind of pain accompanied him every day, like being pricked by needles, like being stabbed by swords, and like being torn by someone at random. The man didn't respond for a long time, which made Shen Yueji feel strange and turned to him. Chapter 95. She was surprised and waved her hand in front of his face. "Your Majesty, what's wrong with you?" The next moment, her hand was grabbed by the man. She fell into the man's arms. The man hugged her so tightly that he wanted to rub her into his body. "Is it my fault?" He never wanted to kill her. Never. He believed her and never doubted her. He just, "Your Majesty. Your Majesty," Shen Yueji struggled in his arms. "Your Majesty, what are you talking about?" "It's me." The woman's restlessness in his arms made Feng Jiuqing gradually come back to his senses. A smile appeared on his pale face. He reached out and smoothed her messy hair. "If there is a next time, I will listen to your explanation, okay?" Shen Yueji heard his words. "Your Majesty, you still think there will be a next time?" Other men say comforting words and promise that there will never be a next time. But you can't wait for this kind of thing to happen again. You don't want me to live a long life. Feng Jiuqing smiled weakly. "In this harem, I can't promise you." If it were someone else, he might not have said it so directly. But it made sense. The harem was a big dye vat. No matter how clean and kind a person was, who could guarantee that they would be the same in this harem? "Go to sleep. It's getting late." The man's words made Shen Yueji's little face startled. She asked in a surprised voice, "Your Majesty, are you really going to stay here tonight?" Feng Jiuqing's beautiful eyebrows raised slightly. "At this time, do you still want to drive me away?" Shen Yueji blushed and squirmed. "Your Majesty, I'm not ready yet." Shen Yueji was shocked. She covered her head and stared at him pitifully. "Your Majesty, why did you hit me?" The young emperor shook his head helplessly. "What is Imperial concubine thinking about? Your Majesty is the emperor and I am the concubine. If you stay here in the middle of the night, what do you want me to think?" She couldn't help muttering. Seeing that the man was about to raise his hand again, she hurriedly lifted her skirt and ran into the hall. She kicked off her shoes and climbed into bed. The man followed her in. Shen Yueji didn't remember it very clearly, but she did have a child in her stomach. Shen Yueji didn't remember it very clearly. The familiar memory was that he was used to hugging her to sleep together. The two of them slept together, and he never did anything that crossed the line. This was the first time Shen Yueji had said that he would stay here for the night. Although she believed that the man did not like her and would not do anything out of line with her, as long as she thought about sleeping with this man on the same pillow again, she would. She couldn't help but hold the brocade quilt tightly. She was afraid that she would do something to him at night. Fortunately, she had a vigilant look on her face and was glaring like a tiger at its prey. As for Feng Jiuqing, He ordered Gao Dezhong to move all the memorials to the table in the inner hall. The candlelight was lit. For her sake, the man specially asked Gao Dezhong to cover the candlelight so that the light would not be too dazzling and make her unable to sleep. The dim candlelight could only illuminate a corner of the table. The man casually picked up a memorial, his movements elegant and his expression serious. His handsome facial features were natural and unparalleled. After staring at the man for a while, Feng Jiuqing seemed to have noticed something. His pale face had already returned to normal. Chapter 96. Shen Yueji came back to her senses at the nonchalant mention of Guifei. She unconsciously opened her mouth. When His Majesty stayed over at the younger sister's palace, did he always read memorials like this until dawn? The man said with a smile, "What is imperial concubine hinting to me?" "No, nothing." Shen Yueji put down the curtain, completely blocking the gentle sight of the man outside. "Your Majesty has to deal with official business in the day. It's better to rest more at night. If it goes on like this, I'm afraid that your body will not be able to bear it." It was night. After Shen Yueji said this to the man, she didn't get a response from the man. She was lying on the bed alone. She was on guard at the beginning, but sleepiness hit her at the end. Her eyelids kept moving up and down, and she finally fell into a deep sleep. The sound of a woman's rhythmic breathing could be heard clearly from the curtain. Feng Jiuqing looked away from the memorials in his hand and fell on the hazy curtain. Thousands of things flashed through his dark eyes in an instant, fast and accurate. He looked at the petite figure in the curtain for a while, and his eyes flickered slightly. He fell on the memorials again. "Your Majesty. Bad news. Your Majesty. Bad news. Something big happened." She didn't know how long she had slept, but there was a sudden noise in her ears. Probably because the emperor considered that she was asleep, the sound gradually quieted down, but it still woke Shen Yueji up. She opened her eyes in confusion, stretched out her little hand to the curtain, and revealed a small head. The night was still dark. Obviously, she hadn't slept for a long time. "Your Majesty, what happened?" Shen Yueji didn't take off her clothes. She tidied up the wrinkles, got down from the bed, and walked to Feng Jiuqing. The little eunuch kneeling on the ground shivered, and his young face was extremely pale. His voice was thick with trembling, and the corners of his eyes were moist. He didn't dare to speak. Feng Jiuqing took a cloak and put it on her. He held her hand and sat down on the round chair. He looked faintly at the servant who broke into the inner hall. It was full of majesty. Gao Dezhong saw such a scene when he came in. He was so frightened that he immediately knelt on the ground. "Your Majesty, it's this servant's negligence." This servant didn't expect this little eunuch to be so daring as to trespass into Phoenix Perch Palace. "This servant will drag him away right now. Your Majesty, please forgive me. Your Majesty, please spare my life. This servant is little Shi of Diaoyang Palace." Something big happened in Diaoyang Palace, so this servant didn't dare to stop and rushed all the way here. This servant didn't see the eunuch who was on night watch outside the palace, so I barged in, please. "What did you say?" The 3 words Diaoyang Palace caused the displeasure on Feng Jiuqing's face to dissipate. He wasn't in the mood to listen to the rest of the conversation and directly asked, "What happened to Diaoyang Palace?" Xiao Shi forcefully swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said, "Corpses." The corpses of those palace maids who had disappeared previously all appeared in Diaoyang Palace. They bit anyone they saw, and even sucked their blood. Feng Jiuqing's elegant face was like a gust of cold wind as he narrowed his eyes at him. "Since when did a palace maid go missing in Diaoyang Palace? Why didn't you report this to me?" Xiao Shi was so frightened that his body was trembling. He kept bowing his head in anxiety. It was Eunuch Li. Eunuch Li said that Your Majesty is busy with official matters, so there's no need to alarm Your Majesty about the disappearance of the palace maids in Diaoyang Palace. It's just a small matter. Perhaps they offended one of the concubines and were punished. Bang! A dull sound came from the table. Chapter 97. He didn't care about Diaoyang Palace's affairs on the surface, but now that he heard the 3 words Diaoyang Palace, his behavior was too abnormal. Those who didn't know better would think that he was hiding some treasure inside. Was he really that afraid that something would happen to Jiaoyang Palace? As for those missing palace maids, they reappeared in Jiaoyang Palace and bit anyone they saw. Shen Yueji's mouth twitched. She had seen these palace maids before. Weren't they locked in a secret room in the back hall of Jiaoyang Palace by Mo Wushang? What was this guy doing? Seeing the emperor's displeased expression, Jiao Dezhong got up from the ground and kicked little Shi. How dare you? Jiaoyang Palace is in trouble, but you didn't report it to His Majesty truthfully and covered it up. Now that such a thing has happened, I think even 100 heads won't be enough for you. Your Majesty, please calm down. Your Majesty, please spare my life. Jiao Dezhong, your servant is here. Set out for Jiaoyang Palace. Yes, Your Majesty. Seeing the emperor leave, Shen Yueji quickly got up from the round chair. The man stopped and didn't look back. Shen Yueji walked to him, her crystal-clear eyes filled with deep worry. Just now, little Shi said that those missing palace maids suddenly reappeared and bit anyone they saw. Your Majesty, be careful. When you go, don't forget to bring more guards with you. Feng Jiuqing looked at her deeply and finally chuckled. Imperial Consort, have a good rest. She covered her mouth and yawned as she came in from outside. She saw Shen Yueji tidying up her clothes and was about to go out. Your Highness, you called me here in the middle of the night. What are you going to do? Shen Yueji didn't care about her and tidied up her clothes. She then heard her say lightly, the palace maids that the regent locked in the secret room have come out. Ah! Knowing that she didn't understand, Shen Yueji looked at her. They are now killing in Jiaoyang Palace. What? She held her chin. Your Highness, aren't they well guarded in the cage? And if someone didn't deliberately let them out, they wouldn't be able to get out. Moreover, the guard is the regent's trusted guard, Ji Chu. How did they get out? Shen Yueji's face turned black. Of course it was Mo Wushang who deliberately released it. Otherwise, how did they get out? Double Happiness was speechless. Why? When it came to the affairs between a man and a woman, Double Happiness's mind spun faster than Shen Yueji's. Soon, she thought of an unlikely possibility and the only plausible reason. Your Highness, do you remember that when we left, you told the Prince Regent that His Majesty would come to your Phoenix Perch Palace? In the end, the Prince Regent's tone didn't seem very good. Shen Yueji, could it be that the Prince Regent is deliberately guarding against you and the Emperor? He knew that His Majesty was staying at her ladyship's place, so he intentionally released those palace maids and had them kill people in Jiaoyang Palace. In this way, once His Majesty finds out, he will definitely personally head over to take charge of the situation. Shen Yueji, apart from this reason, they really couldn't think of how these palace maids were released. Because Mo Wushang was simply too strong, with him suppressing them, it would be harder than ascending to the heavens for those palace maids to come out. The only possibility is Double Happiness's guess. Chapter 98. A few palace maids are killing people in Jiaoyang Palace. They look like ghosts and some of them don't even have legs. Jiaoyang Palace is filled with ghostly wails and howls all night long. This makes people suspect that it's the ghost of the late Empress. Hearing this, Shuangxi nodded and then said, but the late Empress is dead, the regent can't live with a dead person. Also, Your Highness, haven't you noticed that the regent has changed a lot? Not only does he listen to you, but he also takes advantage of you occasionally. Not getting a response, Shuangxi looked at Shen Yueji who was quickly dressing up and couldn't help but speak again. Your Highness, are you planning to go to Jiaoyang Palace? Shen Yueji said faintly, yes, let's go and see. Late at night, the cold wind howled, accompanied by countless torches in the dark night. The pungent smell of blood seeped into the heart and nose, accompanied by the sound of vomiting. The three palace maids were like corpses, biting anyone they saw. In the time that Feng Jiuqing arrived, more than a dozen eunuchs and palace maids in Jiaoyang Palace had died in their mouths. Your Majesty, Li Huaisheng didn't expect things to develop to this point. When he saw Feng Jiuqing's dragon carriage coming, his fat face trembled as he rushed to the front of the Emperor's dragon carriage. Your Majesty, Jiaoyang Palace. Jiaoyang Palace is haunted. I don't know what happened to these missing palace maids, They bite anyone they see. The emperor's cold eyes fell on him, and he raised his hand slightly. Then, dozens of black-clothed secret guards rushed out from behind him, and in a short time, they subdued the 3 palace maids who kept biting people. Swoosh swoosh swoosh, between the flashes of swords. The sound of a head rolling on the ground was especially clear in this dark night. Someone in the crowd retched. Following this retching sound, even more sounds of vomiting could be heard in the cold and gloomy night. The head of the palace maid who had been beheaded was separated from her neck, and a large number of black worms crawled out. Apart from the black worms, there was nothing else in the palace maid's body. It was empty, pitch black. Countless black worms wriggled out of their bodies, and their originally inflated bodies, which were no different from ordinary people, quickly turned into a layer of dry skin at a speed visible to the naked eye. A gust of cold wind blew. Not even his bones were left. Even his skin and tattered clothes had been blown away by the wind. The black worm crawled on the ground, but it couldn't find its destination. It slowly merged with the ground and turned into a puddle of black water. It sank into the ground and disappeared. The cold night was quiet. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them. If they hadn't seen it with their own 2 eyes, and if the Martin Sun Palace didn't still have the mess from before, they would have almost suspected that the scene from before was an illusion. A palace maid who had been missing for a long time and was still able to crawl without legs. Even with its head chopped off, its body was still squirming on the ground. Drinking human blood and eating human flesh. A black bug that had left its body and disappeared on the ground. When did these palace maids disappear? Feng Jiuqing's indifferent voice became calm again. Li Huaisheng had long been scared out of his wits by the scene in front of him. His lips trembled as if he could not hear the emperor's question. Gao Dezhong fiercely kicked him. The emperor is asking you a question. Are you mute? Chapter 99. Feng Jiuqing placed his hand on the armrest and clenched his slender and fair fingers. His dark eyes stared in the direction of Jiaoyang Palace. Thick flames flickered. I have said that if anything happens in Jiaoyang Palace, you are to inform me first. Li Huaisheng, as an old man in the palace, are you ignoring my words? Li Huaisheng's heart was in his throat, and his palms and the backs of his hands were covered in sweat. His legs turned to jelly and he cowered in fear. I had informed your majesty when the first palace maid went missing. At that time, it was Lady Yu Xiu who served the empress who rejected me, saying that your majesty is busy with official business every day and shouldn't disturb your majesty with such a small matter. She also reprimanded me severely, so bang. The emperor slammed the armrest of the dragon carriage. Everyone was scared out of their wits. They knelt down and didn't even dare to breathe. In the depths of his dark and seeping eyes, a gloomy flame was like the breaking of dawn as it cried out. Feng Jiuqing's beautiful lips curled into a faint smile. He looked at Li Huaisheng. In eunuch Li's eyes, my words are not even comparable to a maid. I don't dare. Take him away and beat him to death. Your Majesty, please have mercy. Your Majesty, please have mercy. Li Huaisheng felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. His body was completely cold. His eyes were wide open and filled with fear. His 10 fingers gripped the soil hard, and his head knocked on the ground, making a dong 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 sound. Your Majesty, please have mercy. Just look at me. Your Majesty. 2 men in black came forward and pulled him away. How could Li Huaisheng's desperate struggle resist the well-trained embroidered uniform guards? His cries for mercy gradually faded away, and his mournful cries were exceptionally terrifying in the cold night. The palace maids and eunuchs who were kneeling were trembling as if they were walking on thin ice. Qiu Yang. Your Majesty. Go and investigate. Yes. Suddenly a scream pierced the sky. The emperor's hand that was holding the armrest of the dragon carriage tightened. The next moment, Shen Yueji and Double Happiness were pulled out from the bushes. Seeing Shen Yueji, the emperor's pitch-black eyes flashed with some surprise. He reached out to her and said, "Come here." Shen Yueji obediently walked in front of him and placed her small hand on his big one. He pulled her up the dragon carriage and she obediently sat beside him. Feng Joqing removed his cloak and draped it over her. Didn't I tell you to rest in the perching phoenix palace? Why are you here? Shen Yueji still had a lingering fear in her heart. Her beautiful face was filled with panic after the shock. This concubine is worried about your majesty, so I came to take a look. She lowered her head in annoyance, like a child who had done something wrong. I've made the emperor worry. Feng Joqing patted the back of her hand and comforted her. What did you see just now? I saw. Shen Yueji's face paled when she heard him ask about what happened just now. Her bright eyes flashed with the panic that came after the fright. Seeing her like this, Feng Joqing tightened his grip on the back of her hand. Speak. A white shadow flashed by. It had an ugly face and was full of nails. And it smiled at this concubine. Chapter 100. She was dressed in white and her face was full of nails, bruises and blood. She was ugly. Jiao Dezhong's face instantly turned ashen as he listened to this intermittent description. Wasn't this what the late empress looked like after she died? When he turned to look at the emperor again, his handsome face was trembling. Even the big hand that wrapped Shen Yueji in his palm was shaking violently. His body felt as if cold water had been poured over him. Late empress? Shen Yueji suddenly came to her senses. Jiao Dezhong's words made her recall the white shadow she had seen just now. I saw it when the late empress sank into the lake. She was dressed in white and her face, and the white shadow I saw just now. Suddenly, she couldn't go on. The strength of the man's palm was so strong that he wanted to crush her hand. Shen Yueji was in pain and tears were flashing in her eyes. She tried her best to refute. No, I might have seen wrongly. The white shadow flashed by. The night was so dark and such a big thing happened here. I and double happiness might have been afraid and made a mistake. The late empress is already dead. How could she appear here again? She tried her best to defend herself. It was not difficult for anyone to hear the trembling in her voice. It was the panic after the fear. No matter how hard she tried to explain, she couldn't hide it. Is the ghost of the late empress haunting us? At this time, one of the maids and eunuchs who were kneeling on the ground murmured. In an instant, the emperor's cold eyes were as sharp as ice blades. The little maid was trembling in fear. Sure enough, in the next moment, she was pulled down by someone. The long sword was unsheathed and a cold light flashed. Her head rolled a few times on the ground and the pungent smell of blood filled the quiet night air again. The atmosphere was extremely cold. Everyone felt uneasy and their hearts were frozen. No one dared to keep their thoughts to themselves and talk nonsense. No one is allowed to mention what happened tonight. Perhaps Shen Yueji's struggle was too obvious. Feng Joqing loosened his grip on her hand. Shen Yueji took the opportunity to pull her hand back from the man's palm. She saw that one of her hands was scratched by him. The bruises from before had split open and there was a faint trace of blood flowing out. Your Majesty, the bodies of these palace maids and eunuchs, more than 10 eunuchs and palace maids of Jiaoyang Palace had been bitten to death before they had even arrived. Tonight's incident had happened at night. If it had been during the day, everyone in the palace would have been alarmed. At that time, coupled with Shen Yueji's words, the people in the palace would probably think that it was the ghost of the late empress who was causing trouble. Feng Joqing, on the other hand, was trying his best to suppress this matter. Those palace maids who disappeared before seemed to have been dead for some time. Now that they suddenly came back to life, there must be a reason for this. There must be something controlling them. Meeting the man's gaze, Shen Yueji carefully said, just now, I and double happiness hid behind and saw clearly that there were worms crawling out of their bodies. These dead palace maids and eunuchs had their blood sucked dry. Their faces were frightening and did not look like ordinary corpses. Your Majesty, do you think they will end up like those missing palace maids? It turned into a corpse and came out to bite people. She did not say the rest of her words clearly. Everyone present, especially the palace maids and eunuchs who had experienced tonight's incident, could understand the meaning behind her words. So many people died in Jiaoyang Palace at once and the way they died was horrifying. Chapter 101. Gao de Zhong. Yes, Your Majesty. Set fire to these corpses. Yes, Your Majesty. Your Majesty burned all the corpses of the palace maids and eunuchs without leaving a single one. Maybe the clues are on them. Sitting on the dragon carriage, Jiaoyang Palace was getting further and further away from them. The thick smell of blood in their nostrils also dissipated. Shun Yueji carefully looked up at the emperor who had been silent all the way. Does Imperial Consort also feel that this matter is strange? I've never believed in ghosts and gods. Just now, the white shadow that flashed by really frightened me. However, after I calmed down, I guessed that someone was playing tricks in the dark. Deliberately making a commotion? Letting Your Majesty and me think that it was the ghost of the late Empress? Your Majesty and I may think so, but if the palace maids really heard about it, I'm afraid they will really suspect it. It has nothing to do with her. She didn't understand who he was referring to for a long time. Until the man looked at her, Shun Yueji clearly caught a flash of pain in his eyes. So the she he was talking about, it was her. I know Your Majesty's intention. If those palace maids' corpses are left, I don't know what they will become in the future. At that time, even if Your Majesty wants to hide what happened in Jiaoyang Palace today, I'm afraid you won't be able to. But Your Majesty personally destroyed the clues, so it will be difficult to find out who is behind this. If the person behind this is not beneficial to Your Majesty, I'm worried that Your Majesty. Feng Zhouqing smiled slightly. There are countless people in this world who want me dead. Imperial Consort, you don't have to worry. The dragon carriage stopped outside the Phoenix Palace. The emperor watched her get off the dragon carriage, but he had no intention of getting off. Shun Yueji hesitated for a moment, untied the cloak on her body and returned it to him. Your Majesty, the wind is cold and dew is heavy at night. If you have other things to do, you should put on this cloak first, so that you won't catch a cold. Feng Zhouqing reached out to take the cloak she handed over, and his eyes fell on her red and swollen hands. I lost control and hurt Imperial Consort's hands. It's fine. Shun Yueji grinned and put her hands behind her back without batting an eyelid. Emperor only needs to remember the promise you made to Chunxie. In the future, if you come visit Chunxie more often, that would be the best compensation for Chunxie. Feng Zhouqing chuckled and gestured for them to leave. Niang Niang, this servant felt that His Majesty's smile just now wasn't right. After the Emperor Dragon carriage was far away, Shuangshi came up behind her and whispered. Her heart was in a mess, but she could still smile calmly. It was not easy for Shun Yueji to smile sarcastically. She stretched her body and walked towards the main hall. Yu Xiu's corpse has not been found yet, it may be hidden in a corner. Wait until tomorrow, even if His Majesty wants to cover up the matter of Jiaoyang Palace, I'm afraid that he won't have the strength to do so. Double Happiness was shocked when he heard that. He almost forgot about Yu Xiu. That's right, Your Highness. Why didn't this servant see Yu Xiu's corpse? Yu Xiu's body was lying there. Prince Regent. In the main hall, a man dressed in a loose black robe was half leaning on the Imperial Consort's chair. His phoenix eyes were calm and handsome, his face was cold and pale, and his body was tall and thin. In the middle of the night, he appeared in her Phoenix Palace without anyone noticing and swaggered like this. Chapter 102. Shun Yueji wasn't the only one who had something to say to Mo Wushang. Even Shuangshi was excited to see Mo Wushang. Prince Regent, I have something to ask you. Did you deliberately release the palace maids' corpses that suddenly appeared in Jiaoyang Palace because you knew that His Majesty was going to stay at Her Highness Place tonight? She was too excited and too straightforward. Facing Double Happiness's straightforward words, Shun Yueji glared fiercely. The man raised his eyebrows indifferently. His fair and slender fingers gently tapped on the table. His sword-like eyebrows were drawn down and his soft black eyes were gloomy. After a long time, yes. He didn't deny it and directly admitted it. Shun Yueji, was it really like this? For a moment, she had mixed feelings. This Mo Wushang suddenly changed too quickly. From the beginning, he couldn't wait to kill her. But now, he was actually learning from those men who had their first awakening of love and was jealous of her. In her heart, She would not simply think that he had fallen in love with her. He must have some ulterior motives. Shuangshi's small face was full of smiles. He bowed respectfully and considerately retreated. Shen Yueji stood in the same place for a while. The man was sitting on his side, while she was standing on her feet. Mo Wushang raised his eyebrows when he saw that she didn't move for a long time. He got up and walked to the round chair at the side and sat down, freeing up the chaise longue for her. Shen Yueji, sitting on the chaise longue, Shen Yueji looked at the man's handsome and silent face. Prince Regent, why did you come to my Phoenix Palace in the middle of the night? Mo Wushang's dark eyes twitched. After hearing her words, his sharp lips twitched slightly. I'm tired. If Prince Regent feels tired, you can stay at Diaoyang Palace. Didn't you like to stay at Diaoyang Palace in the past? Shen Yueji smiled slightly. Why do you have to come to my Phoenix Palace? It won't be good if people see it. I'm tired. Shen Yueji's mouth twitched. She glared at him. There's only one bed in Phoenix Palace. What should I do if Prince Regent sleeps with me? If His Majesty suddenly returns and is seen by His Majesty, I won't be able to explain it even if I have 100 mouths. I'm tired. She gritted her teeth and reluctantly accepted his kindness on account of his help today. Shen Yueji held back. Fortunately, I just woke up. If the regent is tired, go and lie down for a while. Seeing that he really got up and walked towards the inner hall, Shen Yueji also quickly stood up. Regent. Hearing her call him, Mo Wushang's footsteps paused. He turned back to look at her, his black eyes filled with doubt. His ignorant appearance was like that of an innocent child, adorable and adorable. To hell with it, Shen Yueji was actually seduced by his amiable and adorable appearance. Her hand secretly pinched her thigh and recovered from the pain. Bengong does not care what the regent prince is planning and only hope that the regent prince can remember that I have no enmity with you and the Shen family also have no grudges with you. Do not hurt the Shen family. They are good to you, so I won't hurt them. Shen Yueji's heart trembled. She turned her back and said, with the regent's guarantee, Bengong can rest assured. Mo Wushang put his big hands behind his back and stared at her thin and charming back for a while. Finally, he walked towards her step by step. The sound of his footsteps was very light. It was so light that when he walked in front of Shen Yueji, she didn't notice. Until a large, cold hand landed on her shoulder. She suddenly came back to her senses and looked at the handsome face in front of her. Chapter 103. Shen Yueji's little face turned pale with fright as she was held in his arms. Shen Yueji was carried to the bed. Realizing what he was going to do, she struggled to get out of his arms. She did struggle out of Mo Wushang's arms, tidied up her messy clothes and stared at him vigilantly. What are you doing? The man answered matter-of-factly, sleeping with me. Bah! Shen Yueji spat at him fiercely. Shen Yueji almost jumped up in anger at his straightforward words. Who's sleeping with you? Dream on. I'm the emperor's woman now. Not yours, regent's. Yes, I am. The man's face was gloomy and his tone was unkind. His cold voice was tinged with a hint of coolness. Without giving her a chance to refuse, Mo Wushang's big hand restrained her waist. Shen Yueji was just about to struggle when she saw his hand on her body a few times. The next moment, Shen Yueji's whole body was stiff like a corpse and couldn't move. She was held in his arms like a corpse, then gently and considerately took off her coat and shoes, and gently put her on the bed. Her eyes widened to the size of copper bells. The man then took off his loose robe and got on the bed in a tight-fitting black suit. She raised her head, and his strong arm stretched out along her head. Her head was comfortably pillowed on his arm. The man's hand pulled her, and her whole body suddenly rolled into the man's arms. Mo Wushang held her in his arms, put his smooth chin on her hairy head, and covered her with a brocade quilt. Sleep. Sleep. Sleep your ass. Shen Yueji's mouth was not sealed, so she could still speak, but she was afraid that if she really scolded, Mo Wushang would feel that she was noisy and seal her mouth as well. The regent came to my Phoenix Perch Palace in the middle of the night just to sleep. To sleep with you. She felt the man's chin move and rub against her head. He found a position that he was satisfied with and leaned closer to her. Only then did he behave. Shun Yueji wanted to cry but had no tears. Prince Regent, don't get so close to me. The Emperor suspected me when he left just now. If Ben Gong's body is stained with your aura, His Majesty will be angry. The large hand on her waist tightened. The man's fingertips rubbed against her waist, tightening and loosening at times. She couldn't look up, so she couldn't see the man's expression. Shun Yueji could only feel that the flames on his body seemed to have become cold again. It was cold and gloomy. Just being hugged by him like this, wrapped in the brocade quilt, that bone-piercing chill came from the outside, directly attacking her body. You are alone. You said it yourself. I was only telling the Prince Regent that I liked him. Besides, you have to be responsible for your own words. Mo Wushang intercepted her. Shun Yueji was speechless. The man was silent for a while. Your body can only be contaminated with my aura. If you don't say anything, I'll take it as a silent agreement. She couldn't wait to curse all 8 generations of his ancestors. Shun Yueji had just opened her mouth to speak a word when her throat couldn't make a sound. She instantly knew that he was up to no good. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only be held in his arms obediently. She also couldn't control his big hand moving around her waist. The man's thin and cold lips were pressed against her earlobe, cool and gentle, tickling her. Chapter 104. His words were as cold as a sharp blade. It was as if the frost that fell from the sky in the dead of winter had frozen into glass. The sharp glass cut a person's neck. With just a slight cut, the person's blood would splatter on the spot. The quilt was warm, but the man's body was cold. The warm quilt was soon infected by him. Fortunately, Nwani came back in the end. Shun Yueji couldn't be bothered with him. She couldn't move and didn't want to waste her energy, so she nestled in his arms and fell asleep. Hearing the rhythmic breathing in his arms, Mo Wushang's black eyes suddenly opened and he moved away from her. His black eyes rolled as he seriously looked at the delicate and beautiful face in front of him. His fingertips gently slid across her delicate face. He had imagined this scene for many years. He longed for the day when the woman he loved the most lay in his arms. His broad chest would be the only place for her. He would use his whole life to protect her and would never allow her to be hurt. Now that the woman he loved was lying in his arms, he didn't dare to miss a glance. He wanted to hold her like this forever, never separate, and sleep like this forever. No one would disturb them. They belonged to each other. In her heart, his big hand slowly moved from her face to her chest. In this beating place, there was him. Her chest was itchy. The strange feeling made Shun Yueji have a wet dream. She didn't sleep well. She opened her hazy eyes and looked at the handsome face in front of her. She was a little surprised when his gaze fell on her chest. Just like that, his hand gently moved around the position of her heart. All his eyes fell on her chest, as if he could see the depths of her heart through the thin layer of clothes. As for Shun Yueji, she widened her eyes and stared at the man. Fuck. Hypocrite. It was because she trusted his character too much that she could fall asleep in his arms. In the end, when she woke up, she saw his dishonest hands and feet. Her angry gaze was too dazzling that Mo Wushang sensed it. His burning gaze moved away from her chest and onto her small face that had turned green from holding back. Sensing the anger on her face, his handsome face was tinged with confusion. Are you awake? Holy shit. If I touch your chest with my hand, see if you can wake up or not. Shun Yueji glared at him fiercely. Mo Wushang did not understand and released her mute acupoint. Shun Yueji said in a hoarse voice, my body is numb. I want to move. Hearing this, Mo Wushang's beautiful index finger tapped on her body. The moment she could move, Shun Yueji pounced on the man like a wolf. The man didn't seem to think that she would suddenly have so much strength, and was pounced on by her. Shun Yueji took the opportunity to sit on him. Mo Wushang had originally intended to push her away, but after seeing this ambiguous position, he obediently lay down. His pair of dark eyes were fixated on Shun Yueji's ferocious and angry face. Shun Yueji grabbed the man's collar fiercely and looked into his eyes, which were as dark as pearls and stars in the night sky. You are a sanctimonious hypocrite. You are the same as those men. Not a single man was good. Mo Wushang, don't think that I don't dare to resist because I'm afraid of you. Mo Wushang looked a little embarrassed because of her pulling. His handsome face moved slightly, but he did not speak. Chapter 105. How could Shen Yueji let him go so easily when she finally gained the upper hand? The man's curly eyelashes trembled slightly, and his dark eyes were as dark as ink. Holding you. Holding me? Shen Yueji sneered. What about your hands? Hands? Mo Wushang closed his eyes, thought about it seriously, and then looked up. His ink-colored eyes were bright like stars. Shen Yueji had a fire in her stomach. She stared at his handsome and thin face and gritted her teeth. You don't want to talk? Regent, do you have nothing to say? I'm keeping you here because the Prince Regent has helped me, so I owe the Prince Regent a favor. Mo Wushang's throat tightened. Regent took advantage of me while I was asleep tonight and touched me. If it were someone else, I would have sent someone to drag that person out and behead him. Since the Prince Regent has helped me, I won't argue with you this time. Just take this matter as me returning the favor to the Prince Regent. In the future, Regent, don't disturb me anymore. Hiss, her waist tightened. The man's tall and straight body pressed her under him. Shen Yueji had no strength to resist, and her eyes were full of lingering fear. The man's eyes were burning, flashing with a faint light. Shen Yueji had goosebumps on her back, and the man's naked eyes made her feel panic. Her stubborn temper made her unwilling to give in. Her strong and calm eyes met the man's eyes. Regent. Whom the man's next move shocked her. His thin lips brushed past her delicate ear. It was soft and had a hint of coolness. She couldn't help but shiver. She even forgot how to say the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Is there any kind of favor that can make me stay with you forever? Swoosh, the man's ambiguous and deep words made Shen Yueji's little face blush uncontrollably like a cooked duck. However, the man said it seriously, and even his handsome face did not show the slightest hint of a joke. Mo Wushang caressed her blushing face. Confusion flashed across his handsome face as he asked again, A warm current gushed out from her nose, as if it was about to rush out. The man's posture was excessively seductive, his handsomeness pressing down on people. No one could compare to his incomparable jade-like face, his pitch-black pearl-like eyes were incomparably resplendent. She had a fair complexion and glowing skin. His glossy black hair was as messy as silk, sticking to his handsome face. It was a devilish yet bewitching beauty. Especially his pair of eyes that were capable of captivating one's soul. They were light and without any impurities, clean and resplendent like luminous pearls, and his entire body emitted an enchanting flame that caused others to be unable to shift their eyes away. Her rosy red lips were like a hibiscus emerging from the water, crystal clear. Mo Wushang's beauty, whether it was his aura or his identity, could be said to be unique in this world. Moreover, there was an indescribable attractiveness about him that even Feng Jiuqing couldn't imitate. Compared to Feng Jiuqing, he was not inferior at all. It was a pity that her predecessor had devoted herself to Feng Jiuqing, and ignored the man who had been silently protecting her behind her, and who had been hurt and insulted by her many times. Initially, she still had some sympathy for him, but then she thought about how he had a change of heart towards his previous self, Jiu Yuqin, because of her. Shen Yueji's little face darkened, and she put her hand on the man's chest, trying to push him away. Chapter 106. Shen Yueji couldn't help glaring at him. What are you doing? I'm warning you, you'd better not push your luck, or I'll call someone. Let the people in the palace see how the regent, who was infatuated with the former empress, climbed into my bed in the middle of the night and pestered me. Mo Wushang didn't say anything. He hugged her tightly and repeated his words, Tell me, what kind of favor can make you willingly keep me by your side forever? Shen Yueji struggled without strength. The man kept asking for her affirmation. She collapsed on the bed, her black eyes mixed with anger, looking back at the man's seriousness. It's very simple. Regent, don't force me. The man frowned. I've never forced you. Shen Yueji sneered. Regent, you came to my Phoenix Palace. First, you sealed my acupoints so that I couldn't move and was at your mercy. Second, you sealed my mute acupoints so that I couldn't scold you. Isn't that forcing? I'm afraid you'll be tired. Mo Wushang raised his eyebrows, and his crimson lips moved slightly. His handsome jade face was filled with gentleness. Shen Yueji stared at him for a long time. Regent, are you serious about me? If a person was lying, his expression wouldn't be so serious. He was so serious that you could feel the sincerity from the depths of his eyes just by looking at them. For some reason, Shen Yueji's heart was in a mess. The man's black eyes flickered, falling on her crimson lips, and deepened. She had a bad feeling. Before the man could react, she found a gap and got out of the man's arms. Mo Wushang let her slip out of his arms. Shen Yueji got off the bed barefoot and walked quickly to the table to light the lamp. The half-burned candle was weak. After she changed the new candle, everything in the hall could be seen clearly at this moment. Her little face was still flushed, and it was burning hot. Sitting on the round chair, Shen Yueji poured herself a cup of tea to calm down. Only when the warm tea flowed through her body did she recover from the throbbing just now. After she got off the bed, the man changed his posture and leaned on the edge of the bed. His hair was a little messy because of the fight with her just now. The black hair stuck to his handsome face, bringing a seductive charm. His perfect side profile could be compared to everything in this world. He sat there motionless, more colorful than a beautiful painting with verdant hills and clear waters. It was dazzling. The man's sexy lips twitched. Shen Yueji didn't know if it was an illusion, but she actually heard the self-deprecating tone in Mo Wushang's voice. When it comes to you, I have always been serious. The regent is being serious now. Could it be that you've forgotten how you wanted to strangle me when you saw me a few days ago? Mo Wushang's eyelids drooped as a trace of regret flashed across his fair and handsome face. In the end, he didn't say anything more. His speechless appearance deeply pleased her. Shen Yueji smiled slightly and tapped her fingers on the table. You men, I can see it very clearly. When you have a plot to make use of someone, you make a solemn pledge of love, sweet words, and deep feelings. I originally thought that the regent would disdain using such means, but I didn't expect that I had overestimated you. Hearing this, Mo Wushang got up from the bed and walked in front of her. Chapter 107. Not now doesn't mean not in the future. Not in the future. Shen Yueji sneered. Before I entered the palace, my mother often said that a man can die for you because it is the responsibility of a gentleman. When a man can give up his identity, give up his position, give up his meticulous arrangements, give up everything that is within reach, and be willing to hold hands with you, that is the kind of love that can only be met by chance. The man looked sad, but still calm. I can not only die for you, but also give up everything for you. Shen Yueji curled her lips. Regent makes it sound nice. When the time comes, I'm afraid. It'll be a piece of cake. Shen Yueji was speechless. She just wanted to say a few sarcastic words to divert the throbbing in her heart. It was undeniable that no matter what Mo Wushang's intention was, his words still made Shen Yueji's heart, which had calmed down with great difficulty, recover uncontrollably again. The man's handsome face inched closer to her, his sexy lips curving into a gentle arc. He put his big hand on the table and circled Shen Yueji's whole body in his arms. As long as it is about you, I can do it. Shen Yueji blushed again and wanted to push him away. Regent, please behave yourself. I am the emperor's woman. Mo Wushang's black eyes were burning, cold and threatening, with a firm tone. You are me. Shen Yueji couldn't bear this cold and hot feeling in a short time. She thought of how he had restrained her and hit her acupoints just now. Shen Yueji didn't want to continue this topic with him. She was afraid that if she annoyed him, he would hit her again later. Regent, before you came, you said you were tired. Now that you have rested and your goal has been achieved, can you leave now? Mo Wushang sat next to her, very close. The man's body, in addition to the cold aura, also had a mouth-watering fresh aura. Shen Yueji moved the round chair slightly to the side. I am hungry. Her breath was stuck in her throat, and she almost couldn't breathe. Shun Yueji glared at the man in front of her, who wanted a foot after taking an inch. She had no choice but to push a plate of pastries in front of her to him, make do with it. The man glanced at her but did not move. These pastries were served by Double Happiness yesterday. This empress didn't even have the time to eat them because of the matter at Jiayang Palace. Seeing Mo Wushang's hand move, he took a piece of pastry and placed it in his mouth. His brows were tightly knitted until the entire pastry entered his mouth. His good-looking brows were tightly knitted together. Shun Yueji noticed that something was wrong. She suspiciously took a piece of pastry and put it in her mouth. As soon as she tasted the taste, she immediately retched and vomited. It actually turned sour. Oh no! Seeing Mo Wushang struggling to swallow a piece of pastry, Shun Yueji facepalmed. Regent, don't you think the taste of this pastry has changed? Yes. The man grunted indifferently. Then why are you still eating? Hungry. Shun Yueji, why did she have the illusion that she was abusing a good person? I'll ask Double Happiness to go to the Imperial kitchen to get you something to eat. Shun Yueji snatched another piece of pastry from his hand. Although the food in this Phoenix Palace is not as good as that in the Regent's residence, this Empress can't let the Regent starve here. After saying that, she was about to call Double Happiness. What are you doing? The man suddenly approached her, his sexy thin lips almost touching her face. Shun Yueji was shocked. Chapter 108. Pa! A loud sound was heard. In the silent hall, this slap was particularly loud, and there was even a response. Shun Yueji's mouth twitched as she trembled her numb hand. Then she looked at the man's handsome and fair face, which was flushed. In his dark eyes, there was an emotion that she couldn't understand. Her heart was beating so fast that it was about to jump out of her throat. Trembling, she touched the conspicuous red half of his face. Regent, are you okay? Her hand was wrapped in his big palm. Mo Wushang's dark eyes were watery, and after a while, he calmed down. In the future, if I do anything wrong, you can treat me like this. Shun Yueji didn't know if he said this out of anger or because he was stunned. Shun Yueji nodded and didn't dare to refute. The man carried her to the Imperial kitchen and gently put her down. Looking at the kitchen in front of her, Shun Yueji was speechless. He suddenly approached her, and it turned out that he brought her to the Imperial kitchen. Her hand was still numb, but looking at the man's handsome face, the red mark slowly disappeared. She felt a little guilty. Regent, are you going to find food by yourself? Mo Wushang didn't answer her, but took her hand and walked in. Cook for me. What? Thinking that she had heard wrong, Shun Yueji's small eyes bulged. The man's dark eyes fell on her. Cook something for me. But I don't know how to do it. I never did this when I was in the mansion. The man's beautiful brows twisted into a dead knot, and his handsome face became gloomy in an instant. Realizing that something was wrong, Shun Yueji quickly pulled away from him, far away from him. The day before yesterday, you cooked for him. Shun Yueji, she seriously pondered over his words. Shun Yueji remembered that when she went to the Imperial study to see Feng Joqing a few days ago, she did make a bowl of candied date porridge for him. But at that time, her hands were red and swollen, and she couldn't do it herself, so she specially asked the cook in the Imperial kitchen to help her. Thinking of this, Shun Yueji's eyes became cold. How did you know about this? Are you spying on me? The man's dark eyes flickered. Ignoring her words, he pulled her arm and walked to some ingredients on the table. Cook for me. Looking at him rather speechlessly, Shun Yueji raised her hands and waved her two bruised and muddy claws in front of him. Prince Regent, is the food made by my hands edible? Are you sure you don't mind? Mo Wushang's gaze followed her raised hands. His eyes flickered and he nodded. I don't mind. Shun Yueji, light the fire. She gritted her teeth and spat out two words. He was making things difficult for her in the middle of the night. Shun Yueji glared at him fiercely. She met his puzzled eyes and looked back at him arrogantly. I am responsible for cooking for you. The Prince Regent can't just stand there and do nothing, right? Or did the Regent not know how to light a fire? Do you think burning fire is condescending to you? There was a flash of understanding in Obsidian's eyes. Mo Wushang obediently walked to the stove and lowered his noble body. His figure was tall and straight, and his black robe was outstanding. His pitilessly handsome facial features were unmatched, and his natural temperament was daunting. Especially his hands, white and slender, straight like bamboo. He didn't look like a person who had done such a lowly job. Chapter 109. A high and mighty man like Mo Wushang was supposed to live in the sky above the mortal world. The man held the firewood and stared at it for a while. No one knew what he was thinking. Then he looked at Shen Yueji. "Shall we burn it now?" His brain froze for a moment. Shen Yueji walked quickly to him, touched a handful of ash from the edge of the stove, and smeared some on both sides of his handsome face. On the man's fair face, there were 2 conspicuous black marks. Looking at the man's puzzled expression, Shen Yueji grinned. "Burn it." Mo Wushang obediently lit the fire and threw the firewood into it one by one. Soon, under the light of the fire, the man's handsome face was illuminated. His handsome face was covered with a layer of golden light, dazzling and attractive. Shen Yueji quickly looked away from the man and began to busy herself with the ingredients. Her petite body was busy, and her delicate and beautiful face was full of seriousness. The man was still holding a piece of firewood in his hand, looking at Shen Yueji in a daze. 2 vegetables and 1 soup. Shen Yueji clapped her hands, and her serious face finally relaxed. Done. Then the next step was. Shen Yueji put the prepared ingredients into the pot, sat on a bench at the side, and watched the man burn the fire with a focused expression. 2 smears of black ash were still on his face, but the man didn't dislike them at all, nor did he wipe them off. He had a handsome face, a sharp nose, and thin lips that were hard to describe in the golden light. A pair of black eyes were even more dazzling than rare treasures. "Mammy Lee, spare me, I won't dare to do it again." "Slave!" Suddenly a blood-curdling scream came from outside. The man's hand holding the firewood paused, and a murderous look flashed across his handsome face. Especially when he felt Shen Yueji look away from him, only to hear a pa-dash sound. The firewood was broken into 2 halves, and before it fell to the ground, wood powder and dust flew everywhere. Why does this sound so familiar? Ignoring Mo Wushang behind her, Shen Yueji frowned and walked out of the imperial kitchen. Not far away, under a big tree, Xiao Zhuozi was tied up and covered in blood. 2 fat eunuchs were on top of him, punching and kicking him. In front of him stood Mammy Lee, who had been punished with 50 strokes of the rod yesterday. Looking at her lively appearance, she didn't look like someone who had been flogged before. Not to mention 50 floggings, she probably didn't even get a single one. Shen Yueji's lips curled up into an evil smile as she crossed her arms in front of her chest. She already knew that Xiao Zhuozi would be eliminated by Jiyu Yuyin, but she didn't expect Jiyu Yuyin to act so quickly. Wasn't she afraid that she would order Mammy Lee to secretly deal with Xiao Zhuozi just yesterday? By then, it would be obvious that she was the one being suspected. Or, she wanted to take all the credit for this. Plotting to make people think that she was the one who killed Xiao Zhuozi. As if she thought of something, a glint flashed across her eyes. Xiao Zhuozi's clothes were tattered, and there were a few exposed parts of his skin that were so cold that his bones could be seen. Blood stained his eunuch uniform, making the color of his clothes even darker. Chapter 110. Senior Nurse Li sneered and looked down at his pitiful appearance. She saw Xiao Zhuozi crawling towards her pathetically, begging for mercy in a pitiful voice. She stepped on Xiao Zhuozi's hand. His bloody hand was already mottled with blood. Now that Senior Nurse Li stepped on it, Xiao Zhuozi's screams sounded weak, as if he was dead. "You traitorous dog! Her Highness treated you well, yet you colluded with Imperial Consort Shen to harm Her Highness. This servant did not, this servant is telling the truth." Li Zhen stomped on the back of his hand several times. It was a heart-wrenching pain. His hand was so painful that it was numb, as if it would fall off his arm at any time. Xiao Zhuozi trembled in pain. This servant is loyal to Her Highness the Empress. I did not. I really did not. Senior Nurse, please investigate. Beat him until he's barely breathing, then dig a hole and bury him. Let him know the consequences of betraying Her Highness the Empress. Senior nurse, spare me. Senior nurse, spare me. Xiao Zhuozi struggled with all his strength. He was injured all over and was no match for the two eunuchs. He struggled to catch his breath. The pain all over his body made him wish he was dead. At this moment, Mammy Li's body is really strong. Even after being hit by 50 boards, she is still as if nothing happened. A mocking voice came from behind. Senior Nurse Li, who had been proud of herself, instantly stiffened. Her body stiffened as she slowly turned around. She saw a petite figure walking over under the moonlight. She was dressed in a pink dress and had a beautiful and clean face. Her red lips were curled into a faint smile and her bright eyes were sparkling in the moonlight. Shin. Imperial Consort Shin. She froze on the spot. The two eunuchs behind saw Shin Yueji and quickly knelt down. Greetings to Imperial Consort Shin. When Xiao Zhuozi saw her, a glimmer of hope appeared in his despairing eyes. He spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground, unconscious. Shin Yueji shrugged slightly and said, compared with these two eunuchs, Mammy Li is really ignorant. It turns out that you, the maid of the Empress, are more arrogant than me. Mammy Li was shocked. She hurriedly knelt on the ground and bowed respectfully. Greetings, Imperial concubine. Shin Yueji walked past her and stood in front of Xiao Zhuozi. She looked up and down at the wounds all over his body and sneered, Senior Li, are you trying to coerce and seduce Xiao Zhuozi? Was it your Empress who ordered you to kill him? But Mammy Li's face suddenly turned pale. Without giving her a chance to speak, Shin Yueji opened her lips lightly and said, Does Mammy Li want to say that this matter has nothing to do with your Empress and you made the decision without authorization? In my opinion, Mammy Li is really arrogant. I just realized that this lowly maid, who has been with the master for a long time, can make the decision without authorization and do such a big thing in the imperial palace. Li Zhen's face was firm and calm. Imperial consort, you must be joking. I really dare not make the decision without authorization. I intend to punish Xiao Zhuozi and then confess to the Empress. The Empress has always been merciful. Bang, there was a sound. Mammy Li's whole body flipped backward uncontrollably. She was forced to swallow the words that were on the tip of her tongue. Chapter 111. It was as if a stone was pressing on her chest, making her unable to get up and struggle. She looked at Shin Yueji in horror. Imperial concubine, what do you mean? Even if I made a mistake, I am also a servant of the Empress. When it comes to punishment, the Empress should be the one to decide, not the imperial concubine. The strength under her feet suddenly increased, and Mammy Li suddenly couldn't breathe, and her face was extremely pale. It's true that Mammy Li is a servant of Xianghe Palace, but since yesterday, Xiao Zhuozi has been a servant of our Fengqi Palace. As the saying goes, when you beat a dog, you have to look at its master. In Mammy Li's eyes, do you have any respect for me, the imperial concubine? How dare you deal with my people in private? How dare you? Li Zhen put her hands on the ground, and her fingertips were in the mud. She stared at Shin Yueji with a pale face. Xiao Zhuozi is a servant of the Empress Xianghe Palace. If a servant of Xianghe Palace makes a mistake, it is natural for him to be punished by the Xianghe Palace. It has nothing to do with the imperial concubine. She let out a scream. Shin Yueji's eyes were full of cold light. If I say he is a servant of Fengqi Palace, then he is a servant of Fengqi Palace. Mammy Li stared at her with a look of anger and fear. Her eyes turned and fell on the two eunuchs kneeling on the ground. The two eunuchs saw her eyes, and they struggled back and forth in torment and fear. They suddenly climbed up from the ground and rushed towards Shin Yueji. Shin Yueji's mouth raised a disdainful sneer, and she didn't move. Swish, a cold light flashed. In the silent night, the cold wind rustled, and the sound of bones breaking made people's scalp numb. The two eunuchs were still a step away from Shin Yueji, and their bodies fell straight to the ground. The blood gushing from their waists was dazzling, and soon the ground was wet with blood. Mammy Li's eyes widened in horror. The two eunuchs were cut into 4 pieces, but they still had some consciousness. They struggled on the ground with their hands, and their oily faces slowly became purple and bloodless. Mammy Lee realized the horror, especially when she saw the man behind Shunyueji. The man was dressed in a black robe. His figure was tall and straight, and his handsome face made people feel cold. He came under the moonlight. The cold moonlight shone on his handsome face, especially on his face that was hard to describe. There were even 2 gray scars on his face. However, this did not make him look like he was in a sorry state. Instead, it made him look like a Rakshasa that came from the netherworld. It was frightening, dangerous, and terrifying. Mammy Lee swallowed hard. At this moment, she couldn't even speak clearly. Prince Regent, why was he here? Why was he with Shunyueji, the Prince Regent, and I saw that the moonlight was so bright that we were having a rendezvous here. But Mammy Lee, you disturbed the mood of the Prince Regent and me. Don't you think it's annoying? Shunyueji smiled and withdrew her foot from Li Zhen's chest. As soon as she withdrew her foot, Mammy Lee immediately lay on the ground and breathed the fresh air awkwardly. Walking to the man, Shunyueji wrapped her hands around the man's slender and strong arm, and leaned her head on his shoulder. The Prince Regent doesn't like to be disturbed. Mammy Lee, for the sake of the Empress sister, I really don't want to argue with you, and I also want to let you go. But the Prince Regent. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.